Kenita, the homeless CEO Patterson, storyteller of poverty and homelessness. I am here with you today. I wanted to bring before you this special presentation, if you will. It is going to be the Democracy Now! Report that is reporting on poverty by America. That is a new book by Matthew Desmond. That is also the Pulitzer winning author of Evicted. I am a housing social justice advocate, and I am the statewide resident council partner advocate agency through Visionaries Incorporated for Faces of Hood Housing Unity Project. And what that is, we go across all 10 HUD regions to speak to the voices, and not even speak to the voices, but bring the voices back to the table of all living in poverty, of all that are across whatever HUD housing looks like. We are here to demystify stereotypes and show how we are enhanced assets with our lived experience, right? And I'm so very glad. That's why we're doing this special presentation of this video. We don't own the rights of anything being played. I just want to say that beforehand and give a disclaimer. But this report is a translator for me. When you have language justice, I feel like this is a report that is filled with language justice for persons just as myself. I do have to speak on my own situation, and others will come into play as well, which they do either way across the board for us. We do tell the stories of those who are trying to prevent eviction, right, on the ground, by way of, people power and tenants just simply knowing their rights and being or having access to safe, decent, sanitary housing, period, is what everyone should have equal access to. But without further ado, I'm gonna pause myself here, and I will be back to tell my thoughts about the video, because a lot of what I have gone through as a Black female founder here in Nashville, Tennessee, is also translated through this video. I always speak about being a homeless planning commissioner on the board for Metro Nashville, Davidson County, um, and being a voice behind the scenes of lived experience as an enhanced asset. I want people to see, with my position, that you can be who you are, period. It doesn't matter what the crowd thinks you should be. Just come as you are and be beautiful, right? And your voice does matter. The lived experience is an enhanced asset again, and it stems from discovering other jewels that are out there. It's so many jewels that are hidden away, tucked away, and not properly cultivated to be able to sparkle as they should. And when I say that, that means that just gaps and barriers. People do not reach the resources that they should have access to because of systemic gaps and barriers. That's what we are here to solve and help people navigate out of. So, just a moment. Now, be right back when it's done. I had to do the first one over. I didn't get to continue the first one. So thank you for your patience with us revamping and learning along the way.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York with Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has proposed increasing the debt ceiling for a year in exchange for sweeping budget cuts that would likely result in less federal money for housing, education, health care, and the environment. McCarthy also pushed for tougher work requirements for recipients of SNAP, that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and to expand domestic mining and fossil fuel production. McCarthy outlined his plan in a speech at the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street.
Before we borrow another dime, we owe it to our children to save money everywhere. Our proposal will examine wasteful Washington spending and executive overreach in all forms.
The White House slammed Speaker McCarthy's proposal, warning it would impose devastating cuts on families and take health care and food assistance away from millions of people. This comes as a new study in the journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, published on Monday, found that poverty is the fourth leading cause of death in the United States, just behind heart disease, cancer, and smoking. The study linked 183,000 deaths in the United States in 2019 directly to poverty. That's an average 500 deaths from poverty every day. Well, today we spend the rest of the hour looking at how there can be so much poverty in the richest country in the world. We're joined by Matthew Desmond. He's author of the new book, Poverty by America. It's Matthew Desmond's first book since he won the Pulitzer Prize for his groundbreaking 2013 book, Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. Evicted, something he knew well as his family was evicted. Matthew Desmond is a sociologist now at Princeton University, where he's director of the Eviction Lab. Professor Desmond, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. This book is a bombshell. It is epic. The title of your book, Poverty by America, doesn't talk about how is it possible that the richest country in the world can have so much poverty, but you say that it's because of its wealth there are so many poor. Lay out the scope of the problem and why you took this on.
Because there is so much poverty in this land of dollars. You know, if you just look at the official poverty line, there's 38 million of us living below it. That means that if the American poor founded a country, that country would be bigger than Australia. But the poverty line is incredibly low. You know, 1 in 3 folks in America live in homes bringing in $55,000 or less. Many aren't officially counted as poor, but what else do you call living on $55K and trying to raise 2 young kids in Miami or Portland? There's an incredible amount of unnecessary scarcity in this land of abundance. So this book is about why, and this is a book about how we can finally abolish it.
And if you could summarize some of the main reasons why, especially given how other wealthy countries don't have nearly the level of poverty that the United States does.
It's an important point. You know, our child poverty rate, for example, is double that of South Korea, Germany, many other of our peer nations. So why? And in a nutshell, there's so much poverty in America, not in spite of our wealth, but because of it. Some lives are made small so that others may grow. And many of us, those of us who have found some privilege and prosperity in America, we contribute to this. You know, we consume the cheap goods and services the working poor produce. We benefit when the stock market goes up because labor costs are pushed down. Many of us get tax breaks from the government, which is an enormous part of government spending. And we protect those tax breaks, which starves anti-poverty programs. And then we continue to be segregationists in America, building walls around affluent communities and concentrating not only wealth and privilege, but also concentrating poverty. Many of us are connected to the problem and the solution.
And we often hear conservatives in the United States talk about the welfare state. but you make the point that our country actually is subsidizing the affluent. Can you give some specifics about how that happens?
So every year we spend about $1.8 trillion on tax breaks. That's about double what we spend on the military. It's a colossal sum. And look, many of us who receive those tax breaks, we have a hard time seeing those as the same thing as food stamps or housing assistance. But both housing assistance and say the mortgage interest deduction, they both government money. They both put money in a family's pocket, and they both increase the deficit. And so if you add up all the tax breaks that are going to families and all the means-tested programs for the poorest families and all the social insurance programs, basically everything the government does for its people, you learn that every year families in the bottom 20% of the income distribution receive about $25,000 a year from the government. But every year families in the top 20% of the income distribution, our richest families, receive about $36,000 from the government. That's almost a 40% difference. That's crazy to me. And our country does a much better job helping folks that have plenty already than it does eliminating and fighting poverty.
This is an absolutely critical figure that you're saying, Matthew Desmond, because so often the argument against helping the poor is why should they get free money when no one else does? And you're pointing out, actually, it's the opposite, that wealthier people get more money from the government than poorer people do. But I'd like you to continue on that point and talk about why, in fact, already in this country, there are millions of dollars available to people who are in the lowest economic bracket that they can't or don't take advantage of. Explain what are the obstacles in the way.
One obstacle is we do a very bad job connecting families to programs that they need and deserve. Sometimes we literally just don't spend the money on fighting poverty. So if you look at a program like the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families Program, or TANF, this is cash welfare. For every dollar budgeted for TANF, only 22 cents ends up in the family's pocket. What's going on here? Well, states have a lot of discretion about how to spend their money, and they spend it in really creative ways. Some states use those dollars to fund Christian summer camps or abstinence-only education, marriage initiatives, things that have nothing to do with alleviating poverty. Many states don't even spend the money. Last time I checked, Tennessee was sitting on over $700 million on unspent welfare dollars. And so this is one way that that money doesn't reach the families that need it the most. And another way is that many families are just leaving a lot of money on the table. You know, 1 in 5 folks that are poorly paid workers that could receive something called the Earned Income Tax Credit, this wage bump, they don't take it. Most elderly Americans that could receive food stamps, they don't take it. And so if you add all that up, you learn every year over $140 billion, billion with a B, of unspent aid is left on the table. This is not a picture of welfare dependency. This is a picture of welfare avoidance, the fact that we as a nation need to do a much better job connecting families to those programs.
And what did the crisis of the pandemic teach us about the ability of government to make a significant dent in poverty? And then, of course, once the worst of the pandemic was over, we've seen now a take back of those policies.
Exactly. So there's 2 resounding lessons from the pandemic when it comes to poverty alleviation. One, organizing works. Social movements pushed for bold relief from the government, and they won. And that relief came. And the second big lesson is that relief makes a world of difference. During the pandemic, we rolled out something called the Extended Child Tax Credit, which was basically a subsidy to low and moderate income families with kids. And that simple program cut child poverty by 46% in 6 months. In 6 months. It was the most historic thing we've done to fight poverty since the War on Poverty and Create Society, 1964. Another thing that we did was we rolled out emergency rental relief. We helped renters that had fallen behind because they had lost their jobs during the pandemic. And that initiative made evictions fall to record lows. We've never stayed low for months and months and months, even after it did. These programs were transformative. But you're right, Juan, they are lifting, they're expiring. And frankly, I want to live in a country where a Congress should have been terrified of taking those benefits away. I want to live in a country where more of us said, no, I want this to be the new normal.
So, Professor Matthew Desmond, you just talked about evictions. You won the Pulitzer Prize for your book, Evicted. Talk about your own life experience and what eviction means.
So I grew up in a little town in northern Arizona, a railroad town, and my family, money was tight. And when my dad lost his job as a minister, we lost our home, and I helped my parents move into a small rental unit. And I think that experience worked its way inside of me, probably provoked me to study evictions later on in life. And I moved to Milwaukee, and I moved into a mobile home park and a rooming house in the inner city of Milwaukee, and followed families getting evicted. And what I saw was eviction causes tremendous loss. Families lose their homes, of course, but they often lose their stuff, which is piled on the street or taken by movers. Kids lose their school. Eviction comes with this mark, a blemish, which can prevent you from moving into good neighborhood and good housing, because many landlords see that mark, that court record, and they say no thanks. And so we push those families into worse housing, and we push those families into high crime neighborhoods. Eviction causes job loss. And if any of you listening or watching today have been evicted, you know exactly why that is. It's such a consuming, stressful event. It can cause you to make mistakes at work and lose your footing in the labor market. And then there's the eviction mark on your soul, your mental health. And when you add all that up, I think we have to conclude that evictions, which used to be rare in this country, which used to draw crowds, evictions are not just a condition of poverty, they're a cause of it. They're making things worse, and they're leaving a deep and jagged scar on the next generation.
I wanted to ask you the political impacts of this debate. Donald Trump is often talked about as having enormous appeal in rural white America, and some of the poorest states in the union have delivered the biggest votes for Trump, places like West Virginia, Kentucky, Mississippi. Wondering your sense of this account of why Trump appeals to poor white Americans.
I think it's hard to answer that question without recognizing the racial element of the appeal. When Trump started his presidential run, famously, he was disparaging Mexicans and immigrants. There's very little evidence that immigrants drag down wages for Native workers or contributing to poverty in America at all. But it really has a deep cultural resonance with a lot of Americans who are white and who are in struggling economic areas. There is a connection here on the ground, though, that I think is often overlooked in the politics, which is on basic issues of economic fairness and justice. There's a lot less polarization than we often see in Washington. Most Americans want a higher minimum wage. Most Americans think that the rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes. Most Americans, Democrat and Republican, believe now that poverty isn't caused by a moral failing, that it's caused by unfair circumstances. The electeds are very polarized, but on the ground, I think there's a lot of Americans that want they want more opportunity, they want less poverty, and they want less inequality on both sides of the aisle.
Professor Desmond, I wanted to ask you about your comment that many well-off Americans, quote, are unwitting enemies of the poor. And this goes to the issue of solutions. Explain how.
So if we just look at tax breaks, for example, so many of us who are homeowners who receive something called a mortgage interest deduction. We can just deduct the interest of our mortgage every year at tax time. And if you look at that deduction and you look at everything that homeowner subsidies amount to, in 2021, we as a nation spent $193 billion on those benefits and only $53 billion on direct housing assistance to the needy, public housing, Section 8. So it's a big imbalance. Most of those property owner deductions, they went to families with six-figure incomes. And we also have to face the fact that most white Americans today are homeowners. and they benefit from one of the sweetest cutouts in the tax code, but most Black and Latinx families are not because of our systematic dispossession of people of color from the land. And so it's really hard to think of a social policy that does a better job of amplifying racial and economic inequalities than that system does. And many of us are protective of those tax breaks. And so this book is a call to reevaluate our values. It's not a call for redistribution, I don't think. It is a call for rebalancing our safety net. I want a country that does a lot more to fight poverty than it does to guard fortunes.
Could you talk about the changing nature of work and the job market over the years and how that's affected definitions or how people see themselves as poor or not? That you've said that your grandparents had careers, but this generation has gigs. How does that relate to poverty?
It's huge. It's a huge part of the story. So after World War II, the job market really delivered for many Americans for decades. You know, in the 1970s, 1 in 3 of us belonged to a union. Worker pay was climbing. Real wages, inflation-adjusted wages, increased by 2% every year. If you had a job for Ford, you worked for Ford, and you could advance in that company. You got some benefits. You got some pride. But as workers started to lose power, as unions started to be destroyed and dismantled, our jobs got a lot worse. And if you look at the real pay, the inflation-adjusted wages for men without college degrees today, it's actually lower than it was 50 years ago. Benefits have gone away, and many of us who are working for Ford now or Apple or Google, that's not the companies, those companies don't sign our checks, right? We're independent contractors without a lot of benefits and without a lot of room for advancement. The deterioration of the American job means that, you know, the government has to do more to fight poverty. When the War on Poverty and Great Society were launched, the job market was strong. And it was kind of a 1-2 punch, deep government investments along with the job market that was delivering. That massively cut poverty in America. Today, the job market just isn't pulling its weight. And this is one of the reasons that we don't just need deeper investments, we need different ones. And one of those investments is finding ways to empower more American workers.
You've called for poverty abolition, and this goes right to your previous point. Lay out the ways poverty can be abolished. And again, that point you made earlier, that the pandemic taught us so much. For example, cutting in half child poverty within 6 months, and then the U.S. Congress votes to do away with that program, throwing millions more children into poverty?
Right, exactly. You know, a study came out a few years ago that showed that if the top 1% just paid the taxes they owed, not paid more taxes, just stopped evading taxes, that we as a nation could raise an additional $175 billion. That's more than enough money to reestablish that child tax credit. You know, that's enough money to double our investment in affordable housing and still have money left over. That's basically enough money to lift everyone under the official poverty line above the line. We have the resources. We know how to do it. So when we're met with this kind of question about how could we afford this? How could we afford to cut child poverty in half or make sure every family in America has a decent, affordable home? I feel like those questions are sinful and dishonest. The answer is staring us straight in the face. We could afford it if the richest among us took less from the government. We could afford it if we designed a welfare state to do less to subsidize affluence and more to eradicate poverty. So how do we get there? We need deeper investments in the issue, which is funded by tax fairness and enforcement. We can go deeper. We also need different programs that attack the unrelenting exploitation of the poor in the labor market and in the housing market especially. And then finally, our walls, they have to go. We have to end segregation in America and strive for broad, open prosperity. Now, this sounds like a policy discussion, right? But it's also a personal commitment. So a call for poverty abolitionism is not just about voting the right way or signing up to join a social movement. It's also about ways that we need to interrogate our everyday lives and commit ourselves to divesting from poverty in our consumer choices, our neighborhood choices, and all the little ways that we go about our life that unwittingly contributes to this issue.
You mentioned the housing market and affordable housing, but the reality is that for most Americans, their main source of wealth is whatever equity they have in a home they've purchased and pay a mortgage on over the years. But increasingly, we've seen these private equity firms come in, especially after the housing crash of 2008, and buy up all of this housing. And so now we have this unusual situation of private equity having an enormous say over affordability in housing in the United States. What can be done about that?
I think one thing that can be done is for us to get serious about expanding homeownership opportunity for first-time homeowners and for working families. You know, last year, 27% of homes sold in America were for under $100,000. Affordable homes, but only 23% of those were financed with a mortgage. You know, the rest were kind of bought up in cash by landlords or real estate speculators. So what's going on? And the thing that's happening is that many banks just aren't interested in these small dollar mortgages. And it's not because those small dollar mortgages are riskier, they're just less profitable. So if I'm a bank, I have an incentive to give you a mortgage on a $5 million home, but I'm not really interested in funding that $75,000 home. So this is where the government could step in. It could help down payment assistance and insure those kind of mortgages in a different way to incentivize that low-income families have that opportunity to step into homeownership. You know, I remember meeting a woman named Lakia Higby in Cleveland a few years ago, and she was renting a 4-bedroom home for $950 a month. But if she bought that home under conventional mortgage standards, her mortgage payment and insurance would be about $570 a month. That'd be $4,500 more in her pocket every year. That's real money, and without rent hikes. And so I think that's one way we can kind of step in and make sure those homes go to more people and not just to go to private equity.
Matthew Desmond, you talk about labor unions promoting worker empowerment, which ultimately works to fight poverty. And you say also that poverty is so expensive. You have this beautiful quote of James Baldwin: anyone who's ever struggled with poverty knows how extremely expensive it is to be poor. Put those two together.
So if you look at just the financial exploitation of the poor, you know, you learn that every year overdraft fees pull about $11 billion a year in fees. Only 9% of bank customers pay most of those fees. Who are those 9%? They're the poor made to pay for their poverty. And if you add that up to the $1.6 billion in check cashing fees and almost $11 billion in payday loan fees, you learn that every day, every single day, $61 million in fees are pulled from the pocket poor. So when Baldwin wrote that, he couldn't even imagine these receipts. So this is one way that we need to address poverty, because poverty isn't just a lack of income, it's a lack of choice. And we need to expand the choices folks have in terms of where to work, where to live, and how to access money and credit.
And the issue of unions fighting poverty.
So unions have an incredibly impressive track record in striving for worker empowerment. So one idea in the book is something called sectorial bargaining, which is a pretty wonky name, but the idea is pretty simple. Instead of organizing one Starbucks, then this Starbucks, and another Starbucks, what if everyone in food and beverage in America, every single worker, took a vote? And if that vote cleared 50%, 60%, whatever we would like, it would activate the Secretary of Labor, who would form a bargaining panel made up of worker and business representatives who could come to an agreement for unions or protective rights that would protect all folks in that industry, every single barista, every single Starbucks.
We have 5 seconds.
So I think unions and worker power is essential to ending poverty in America.
Matthew Desmond, we thank you so much for being with us and for your book, Poverty by America. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Okay, thank you so much for tuning into that. And it is a very big reason that that was played. Again, I do go back to I seriously believe in with Visionaries Incorporated. It is just that it is not a thing that is mine. It does not belong to me, just as a nonprofit should not. It belongs to the people. Though my story as the homeless CEO is one of the major stories that is told. I call my family the pilot family because we had to live and go through every single step in order for us to see gaps and barriers. And exactly to every single thing that Mr. Desmond said, I totally and overly agree with him. I do put out an ask to sit down and be able to speak with him. That would be everything because I had no clue. I started back in 2016 as a housing social justice organizer, traveled the whole nation and spoke and told my story. That's exactly how I got started, by telling my story. And never will I negate that from the whole big scheme of things. However, it's even bigger than my story, right? However, that has to be told, just as Mr. Desmond won a whole Pulitzer Prize behind the story of being evicted. And quite honestly, I see how to expound and expand on exactly what he's talking about. And again, fully touching and agreeing as a fellow human how dehumanizing it is to face eviction, homelessness, to be in poverty. If you think about it in a way, he was able to do language justice for me here. I speak on all of the very things that he was speaking about, and I am also ridiculed for speaking out about it. And it is not a thing where I care about being talked about at all. Don't care. It's just the fact that all of this is true exactly to what he's saying. And then being behind the scenes and seeing how much more, even though social services and welfare hurt so bad, literally by living it, I know this, right? I don't need to take a poverty simulation if I am one better than one that I can ever take, right? And so that is being heard as a black female founder, um and a person. Listen, this is what we are. We are underneath grassroots. And that means that we are the very same thing that our clients are. At one point, I remember signing up for USA housing, and that is supposed to be something that is catered towards low income individuals living in a rural area. And I ended up with my family homeless during the pandemic. Worst time in the world to be homeless again. And it was so many families doubled up inside of one family home. And to be told that, oh, it's not important that you have somewhere to live because you have a roof over your head because you're staying with family, you're couch surfing. But my point with the housing first model is, where are you living with family? Is it habitable? Um, is this even a safe situation? Are you in something that's domestic violence by dealing with other family members? Are you safe? Are the children safe? Number one, first and foremost. Most times, the answer to that question is totally no. We've seen situations where moms got together and squatted a whole place in California. I remember when this story happened, and I remember the backlash that they got for doing something about their poverty. They took a chance and took a choice because none were being presented to them. That's exactly what we are. And so many things try to stop and block us because it is to their benefit, just as he said, for the things that happen to us in poverty to go forth. Um it helps other people that are already wealthy. And what they don't get, when I hear someone say something about people on welfare, right? It makes me think, do they not realize that, remember, when you get SNAP or TANF, you have to be employed. There is a job component built in there, right? As if you're just being lazy and trying to collect benefits. And that's never it for me. Anyway, I don't know too many people that actually think like that. And stigma wise, we have to okay, I can't work this many hours because this is going to affect my Section 8 voucher. So it's so many ins and outs to the loopholes that make people look a stereotypical way, but that is not the case for everybody across the board. If you go look in places like Faces of HUD Housing Unity Project and see the different people and hear them, you will find capable, intelligent individuals that can are capable of becoming homeowners, are capable of being good tenants, good neighbors, good children, good, you know what I mean? Like, let's create real eco-friendly communities, right? And that are not harmful, that are not welfare, that are not charity. Because all of these things make assumptions that are not true, and they throw you back into these cycles. I know at some point during everything that I have endured, I felt like I was in an entire washing machine being tossed about. That's what the trauma felt like. And then when you get certain landlords that come for you to try to threaten your housing, it gives you a PTSD. That's why I speak on every single thing that I speak on, and I will not again negate any piece of the story. I have to speak on this. And who else will if I do not? Especially here in Tennessee. I'm so glad to hear Mr. Desmond speak on that. That's why I'm putting that ask out to speak with him, because it is so very valuable to housing. I put it in the chat during the whole conversation. Housing is the nucleus of every single family, and without it, everything goes haywire. Literally, we sit there and watch it. So I just wanted this. I had played the wrong video through and do it, but I wanted to speak on this because it's Tennessee's in Tennessee that are giving funds. They're always the ones, but I beseech you to recognize you. Everybody had to start somewhere, and it is not transparent on the way things. We need our cab, just as HUD suggested. Our consumer advisory board in the scenes that, but quit censor like me and quit acting like what I say is wrong, because it's the truth, it's facts. I'm not coming to you with anything that is just any bull jive, let's say it that way. That's the best way I could put that. I'm not talking a foreign language. Now that you have heard data surrounding this that didn't really, it existed, but when someone like myself is speaking on it, you play like you can't understand a foreign language just because a person with lived experience is explaining it. And for me, my mind works different. I always am very transparent about my learning abilities, or DYS abilities. You hear me? The way a person's brain works, and that's the thing with humans too. Grace and mercy, empathy, fruits of the spirit. That's how I operate. I don't, anything else is foreign to me, right? I know that we are here to be living epistles to help each other along, and it's bigger than us. Period. It's bigger than us. So look out for us coming up. May the 1st is going to be May Day. The SOS on housing, and we got a lot of stuff coming up. I dare not the money to do so. Take our ideas and run with them. And what the thing is they don't understand is you have to include us because you don't have the full recipe. So only so far you could go with our information. And I again speak on this from experience. I'm not just gonna make that scenario up just to be talking on whatever. No, this is from lived experience, and we need to speak on it, period. And there needs to be a whole community healing, period. Period. Everybody tries to avoid it. Everybody uh, is complicit because it benefits you. You don't want to get in it to, you don't want to step on toes. You don't want to be in the way. You don't want to jeopardize what you got going on, but you won't stand up. Yeah. And then play like any and everybody else is not doing what they're supposed to because they speak like me. No, I'm doing what I'm supposed to. I'm in my lane. I navigate my lane very well. I don't try to cross over into anyone else's. Now, if our lanes intersect, okay, what can we do to help each other align and build up? You hear me? What can we do to make opportunities? What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats? Yeah. And crazy thing about it, um, people, not even people, but the SWAT was talked about this last week, and I was already in the process of making our organization on paper SWAT, if you will, because I already have it drafted. So just transferring it into being a part of. I really asked the question. That's the thing. For me, I'm gonna speak for me transparently. I do not want to ask for help in my own community, in my own hometown, because of how ridiculed I have been. And it just makes you not want to even communicate with people because you know it's going to be something at the back of it that they figure out how uh, to make you the unqualified one, when I, not even just I, we are the most qualified to bring solutions to poverty when you have lived through it, just like Mr. Desmond said. So just, yeah, a lot of things. Because if I really, 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 really went live and really, 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 really started just naming off names, I could have done it like that a long time ago, but we have been working behind the scenes, trying to get people to come to the table, trying to get on the same page, trying to get accountability just as anyone else calls for accountability from us. They expect it from us, but they do not appropriate on the end of, okay, let's start over from scratch and go forth in communal healing, because there have been some things that we kept you from systemically as a barrier. It showed up in the Tennessee 3, very evident. Then turn around. I don't know if this resurfaced or what, but Poverty by America talks about it. Come on, you can't refute it when more than one person is saying it, and it is evident. It is evident on repeat. And then what you do, people like me, you investigate, you try to dehumanize us, you try to tear us down. It's gossip, gaslighting, all the things that are negative. If I had one thing I could go back to school for, it would be and I don't, this is not a full career path or a subject, but if it was, ethics would be my thing, and I would be an honor roll student in it. I love ethics. I love doing right by people since I was a child. So when people come sideways and, try to act a certain kind of way, you can't be seen with me because you have been talking about me behind my back with other folks. Or, okay, even with me assuming something, why did I have to have the need to feel that way in the first place? Why did that vibe come across? Why did that frequency come about? Because that's the atmosphere. That's what's being received. And then it's just this huge conflict in the community of a festering wound, and everybody wants to put a band-aid over it. And nobody wants to have that taboo conversation of healing across the board. Because it's so many leaders that I have seen, they tell people not to work with me or whatever. Why? Because you're benefiting from the problem. You might even look like me. You might even have been through what I've been through. But guess what? I'm never going to compromise myself. Not all money isn't good money. If it's compromising me, I don't want it. I needed to be teaching me. I needed to be building me, not only me, but every single person that comes behind me, every single person that I am doing this for. And they are the reason that the work continues to go forth at a volunteer capacity, where I don't even have my own funds, or I'm always applying for a job, and it's a whole department that I refuse to even apply for because I already know what it is, and that they're not even going to give me a fair shot. None of that should be. And it should be a space and place where this can be addressed, because it is happening behind the scenes, point blank, period. And it should not be. It should not be behind the scenes that people are stopped from not only getting a job, being on commissions, on boards, because they're going to speak the truth and that the truth is going to come out. So therefore, I'm such a threat that you have to continue to try your best to block me, but that cannot happen. And we have written, like I said, up to Washington and beyond on speaking on lived experience. It was not too popular before. And like I said, since I've been speaking on it since 2018-19, when a series of events happened to me, and 4 of those events that took place almost took my life, just by way of mental health. And beyond that too, there were different attempts. And I speak on that because somebody coming behind me will know what to look out for. That's why I speak on what I do. And I speak about the situations behind the scenes also, because, like, why waste your energy rebutting me? Why? When it's just adding to the perpetual cycle of keeping us separate, siloed, and got, basically. Because it could happen to you at any given point. Anything can happen to anyone at any given time. One of my situations that was my actual only eviction. I got injured on a job by a child and couldn't go to work for a month, even though I had ongoing problems beyond that. But the doctor had set me down for a month because I could not lift my entire head. That's how bad it injured me from being hit in the chin. And I'm going to tell you this, at a child that said he was going to turn into the devil on me, that lets you know when you are doing right, the enemy gets mad, and just know the enemy gets mad. And some people even don't even want you talking on that. Anything you say, it's got to be something that someone does not want you to say it that way, or someone doesn't want to hear the message that way. I'm not here for that. I am here for advice, and you can directly the vehicle of the Holy Spirit can be for me or not wanting, because if it was me, I would remain behind the scenes and just do what I do. But I have to speak out on these things in the manner that God tells me to do so, not the way I want to. Because I'd be telling names if it was up to me. He ain't told me to say no names just yet. However, it's crazy. The stories still have to be told, period. So thank you so much. Please, I'm gonna get both of those books, Evicted and Poverty by America, because that is so very true. And I really would beseech to reach out to Mr. Desmond. I would love to interview you and or just have a conversation, period. It doesn't have to be anything. It's just love the privilege of speaking. Have a phenomenal week. Be so very blessed and look out for the things that we have coming down the line.